Sound is legal resistance, hip hop's role in CRT's future. Good morning, rolling into afternoon. My name is Gregory Parks. I'm a professor of law at Wake Forest University School of Law. I want to thank you send my thank yous to the organizers of this tremendous, celebratory, and timely symposium, and for their efforts to bring us together as a community. Thank you to those of you who have chosen to attend the session, Sound as Legal Resistance, Hip Hop's Role in CRT's Future, which is based on a book that I am co-editing with Professor Etienne Toussaint, tentatively titled Prophets of Rage, Public Enemy, Critical Race Theory, and the Sound of Legal Resistance. This morning and into this afternoon, my co-panelists and I will proceed as follows, though not necessarily in this order, though I think we'll keep this order. Cheryl Wade, Harold F. McNeese, Professor of Law at St. John's University, will draw from her project titled Public Enemy and CRT, Re-Energizing DEI Work in the Face of Racism's Permanence. In doing so, she will explore the relationship between CRT, Derek Bell's thesis on the permanence of racism, and Public Enemy's music to address the ongoing issues of anti-Black racism in the United States. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Jade Craig, Assistant Professor of Law at the University of Mississippi Columbia Law School, will draw from his project after the
I graduated from Columbia Law School, but I teach at the University of Mississippi.
Why do I have that? Okay, teaches at the University of Mississippi. I thought somebody named Columbia gave a lot of money to Mississippi Law School.
The building has a name.
All right. We'll draw from his project after the shutdown, racial capitalism and economic development in distressed communities of color. In doing so, he will draw on two specific Public Enemy songs, Shut 'Em Down and Can't Trust It, from their 1991 album, Apocalypse 91, The Enemy Strikes Back, to examine the history of economic development in economically distressed Black communities through the lens of race as a social construct and property law. Etienne Toussaint, Associate Professor of Law at the University of South Carolina, Joseph F. Rice School of Law, will draw from his project titled Digital Resistance and Afrofuturism Futures. In doing so, he will explore the legacy of Public Enemy's resistance ethos and its impact on contemporary digital activism, linking their revolutionary music through songs like Fight the Power, 911 is a Joke, and Burn Hollywood Burn, and message to Afrofuturist visions of Black liberation. I will start with some remarks drawn from my project, Message to the Black Man and Woman in America, Public Enemy, Cultural Resistance, and Racial Agency. In doing so, I will examine how Public Enemy's music reflects the influence of Black Power, of the Black Power movement, and embodies the CRT principle of cultural resistance and racial agency. Across its discography, Public Enemy has consistently urged Black people to develop race consciousness, understand their collective history, and embrace their power to resist systemic oppression. The group's 1987 album, Yo Bum Rush the Show, laid the groundwork for this message with the track Right Starter, Message to the Black Man, and songs like Prophets of Rage and Party for Your Right to Fight from their 1988 album, It Takes a Nation of Millions to Hold Us Back. But before we do all of that, I'd like to offer some context, a brief history of CRT, and a brief history of socially conscious hip-hop music, and then I'll talk briefly about my work, and then we will turn it over to, we'll start with Cheryl, and then we'll turn to Etienne, and then Jade will follow up last.
Okay.
So in the early 20th century, a group of legal scholars at Columbia and Yale law schools, the legal realists, helped to define a new agenda for legal education and practice. Legal realism was not a monolithic school of thought. There were broadly three types of realists. One, the social scientific variant that employed the insights and methods of empirical sciences, social sciences specifically. Two, the critical oppositional variant that sought to expose the contradictions in classical legal formalism. And three, the practical political variant that designed, made, and enforced reform policies. Legal realism served as a precursor to the Law and Society movement in 1964 at the University of Wisconsin. Law and Society is the study of law in its social context by employing the social scientific study of law. However, if one is to study law as a social science, one must define law as more than a mere set of rules and principles, but rather as a social institution, as interacting behaviors, as ritual and symbol, as a reflection of interest group politics, and as a form of behavior modification. In the late 1970s, law faculty who had been directly and indirectly influenced by legal realism through Yale's Law and Modernization program, as well as the Law and Society movement, founded Critical Legal Studies. CLS based itself on three propositions. Law, one, reflects the interests of those in power. Two is best, or it's four propositions. Two is best understood by paying attention to the context in which it is made. Three is not objective, but rather biased. And four is inherently political. In the early 1980s, between Derek Bell's battles at the departure from Harvard Law School, as well as his establishment of a scholarly agenda that placed race squarely at the center of intellectual legal dialogue, provided a foundation for CRT. So did concerns about racial representation at the 1985 CLS conference and racial critiques of CLS at the 1987 CLS conference. In 1989, 24 CRT workshop participants gathered in Madison, Wisconsin, defining CRT as a race-based systemic critique of legal reasoning and legal institutions. And if I may add, an area of critique, scholarship, but also, and maybe most importantly, activism. So what about socially conscious hip-hop? Hip-hop has always been about entertainment, but it's at its best when it's also about social issues. And the seeds of socially conscious hip-hop took root during the very period that CLS and then CRT emerged. Grandmaster Flash and the Furious Five's legendary song, The Message, released in 1982, proved that hip-hop could educate while it entertained. If I may add, my frat brother and colleague Etienne Toussaint wrote a great law review article based on this song a few years ago. The significance of The Message as a statement about law and policy should not be underestimated. In a few stark, eloquent verses, the song sketched out the city that the hip-hop kids came home to when the clubs and the block parties were over. Here are roach-infested tenements and failing schools, predatory junkies and pitiful bag ladies, hookers and killers, inflation, unemployment, and strikes. Things fall apart. The song concludes on a low note, chronicling the life and death of a kid who sees that the only people making decent money on the block are the number book takers, thugs, pimps, and pushers. So he drops out of school, turns a stick-up kid, gets sent to jail, and ends up swinging from a noose in his cell. Members of the hip-hop group Public Enemy came of age and consciousness in this political and musical era. Public Enemy has its roots at Adelphi University, where I'm from, on Strong Island, New York, also known as Long Island. When Carlton Ridenhour, a.k.a. Chuck D., a 1984 graduate, and William Drayton, a.k.a. Flavor Flav, met while Chuck D. was hosting Super Spectrum Mix Hour, a Saturday evening hip-hop radio show at the WBAU, a Long Island, New York radio station. Together in 1985, they made the song Public Enemy No. 1 to promote WBAU. It became a New York sensation. Around 1986, Bill Stephanie, one of Chuck's friends, took a job with Def Jam Records, and in that capacity, he helped a fledgling producer and label founder Rick Rubin to sign Chuck D. Stephanie's goal was to blend the hard-hitting style of the biggest hip-hop group at that time, Run DMC. Many of you young faces in here probably have no idea what I'm talking about, with political and social consciousness. Chuck recruited his team at Spectrum City, which included brothers Hank and Keith Shock Lee, as well as Eric Vietnam Sadler, collectively known as the Bomb Squad, to handle production. Richard Griffin, a.k.a. Professor Griff, became the group's Minister of Information. He brought along with him members of a group he formed to do security for Spectrum City parties. The group, the Unity Force, had been influenced by the Black Panthers and the Nation of Islam. As part of Public Enemy, they would be called the Security of the First World, a.k.a. S1Ws, a rebuttal to the notion that black people were from third world countries. With the addition of Flavor Flav and Norman Rogers, aka Terminator X, as DJ, the group Public Enemy was born. In 1986, Public Enemy recorded their first studio album, Yo Bum Rush the Show. It was released in February of 1987. Most of the album was not overtly militant because the group hadn't yet figured out how to sharpen their storytelling skill and musical acumen to make the narrative deeply resonant. Nonetheless, a commentary in the Washington Post juxtaposed Yo Bum Rush the Show to Public Enemy's white label mates the Beastie Boys' 1986 album, Licensed to Ill. Journalist Joe Brown described the album as a more serious brand of inner city aggression. According to the music journalist Jeff Chang, the Yo Bum Rush the Show album cover featured the group readying themselves to bring black militancy back into the high noon of the President Ronald Reagan day. And scrolling across the bottom of the album cover was the wording, "The government's responsible, the government's responsible, the government's responsible." The album's first two singles were Public Enemy #1 and You're Gonna Get Yours. Throughout 1987 and 1988, Public Enemy worked on their second studio album, It Takes a Nation of Millions to Hold Us Back. They were intentional about making a hip-hop equivalent to Marvin Gaye's What's Going On, an album noted for its social commentary. It Takes a Nation of Millions was more militant and overtly socially conscious than Yo Bum Rush the Show, and Chuck D had also become more politically aware. As such, It Takes a Nation of Millions included sound bites from the Reverend Jesse Jackson, Minister Malcolm X, Dr. Khalid Abdul Muhammad, which connected the band's mission with past African American struggles. It Takes a Nation of Millions is a combination of political rhetoric and non-bullshit aesthetic. In June of 1988, Public Enemy released It Takes a Nation of Millions. Commentary in the Los Angeles Times described the album as incorporating some of the dynamics of the early rap records, such as Grandmaster Flash and the Furious Five's The Message and Run DMC's Sucker MCs, combined with the radical, socially conscious tradition of of groups like The Last Poets. The album was selected by Rolling Stone as number 12 on their list of the 100 greatest albums of the 80s and is still considered one of the most groundbreaking rap albums ever made. In 1989, the group returned to the studio to record their third album, Fear of a Black Planet, and included singles Welcome to the Terror Dome, written after the band was criticized by the Jewish community for Professor Griff's allegedly anti-Semitic comments, 911 is a Joke, which criticized emergency response units for taking longer to arrive at emergencies in black communities than in white communities, and Fight the Power. Regarded as one of the most popular and influential songs in hip-hop history, and the theme song for Spike Lee's movie Do the Right Thing. So what is Message to the Black Man and Woman as I think about it in Public Enemy's lyrics? So one song I look at is Right Starter Message to the Black Man on Yo Bum Rush the Show, Yo Bum Rush the Show from 1987, titled after the book written by the Most Honorable Elijah Muhammad and published in 1964. In 65, Elijah Muhammad, if you don't know, was like the central figure in the evolution and growth of the Nation of Islam. Part of the lyrics say, you spend $1 in the 80s, what you get is a preacher. Forgiving this torture for the system that brought you. I'm on a mission and you got that right. Adding fuel to the fire, punch to the fight. Many have forgotten what we came here for. Never knew we had a clue, so you're on the floor. Just grooving, not knowing about your past. Now you're looking pretty stupid while you're shaking your ass. The lyrics beg the question, what role should black institutions, for example, in any particular moment in black racial uplift, like the black church? What does it take to spark social consciousness when it is most needed to bring about change? How do you juxtapose these concerns in a moment where people should be most engaged in the fight for social change? And Prophets of Rage on their It Takes a Nation of Millions to Hold Us Back album. It starts out by asking stating, you're quite hostile, and the response is, I got a right to be hostile, man. My people have been persecuted. The lyrics underscore that then, as now, racial consciousness precipitates a rage rooted in a knowledge about what black people endured and continue to endure in this country. The lyrics say as follows. I rang your bell, can you tell I got feeling? I just peace at least because I want it. I want it so bad that I'm starving. I'm like Garvey, So can you see, B? It's like that, I'm like that, Nat, leave me the hell alone. If you don't think I'm a brother, then check my chromosomes. And then you check the stage, I declare a new age, get down for the prophets of rage. These lyrics highlight ideas of repatriation from Marcus Garvey, rebellion from Nat Turner, and that these ideas speak to authentic blackness. Chuck D goes on, left or right, black or white, attack the lies, the books that you're reading. It's knowledge of yourself that you're needing. Unlike Vessia Prasa, you have a reason why. To debate the hate, that's why we're gonna die. Mandela, cell dweller, Thatcher, you can tell her clear the way for the prophets of rage. Power to what the people say. Here the lyrics underscore the need for true racial self-knowledge, and they highlight again the ideas of rebellion with that Denmark Vesey and Gabriel Prosser, and defiance with Nelson Mandela in an age of governmental oppression. Party for your right to fight, off of It Takes a Nation of Millions to Hold Us Back. In that song, Chuck D raps, power and equality, I'm out to get it. I know some of you ain't with it. This party started right in '66 with the pro-black radical mix. Then at the hour of 12, some force cut the power and emerged from hell. It was your so-called government that made this occur like the grafted devils they were. He goes on, J. Edgar Hoover, and he could have proved to you, stinking sucker, he had King and X set up. Also a party with Newton, Cleaver, and Seal, he ended. So get up, time to get him back, you got it. Get back on the track, you got it. A word from the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, know who you are to be black, boy. Here the lyrics underscore the desire for the power of political and social self-determination, exemplified by the work of the Black Panther Party for self-defense. However, with the racial progress, always comes racial retrenchment, and unsurprisingly at the hands of the U.S. government. However, race consciousness can play a critical role for repressive governmental forces. In closing, they state, to those that disagree, its cause is static for the original Black Asiatic man, cream of the earth, and was here first, and some devils prevent this from being known. But you check out the books they own. Even Masons, they know it. They refuse to show it, but it's proven in fact. It takes a nation of millions to hold us back. There's something inherently powerful about being, in the words of the Nation of Islam, black and cream of the earth, or being here first. The immense power of the collective is the oppression to be overcome, but so too, a nation of millions is needed to achieve liberation. It's an age-old tale. I know that this session is about looking towards the future, and these lyrics are far in the past. And for some of you, maybe not all of you, for some of you, you have no idea who Public Enemy is, who Thatcher is, who many of these individuals might be. But it's an age-old story. The same issues that, and many of the same issues that arose in the period of Vesey or Turner or Prosser or Mandela or Garvey or Elijah Muhammad or Malcolm X are present today. And the fight continues. All right. We will turn next to my colleague, Cheryl. I could just rap this stuff to you, but. All right, Cheryl, you're next.
Okay. That was great, Greg. I'm sorry I couldn't be there with all of you all today. I'm stuck in New York for a variety of reasons. But I'm going to talk a little bit today about diversity, equity, and inclusion, DEI. And my chapter for Gregory's forthcoming book is going to be about permanence of racism and the social construction of race. But today, in the interest of time, I'm just going to focus on permanence of racism. And one would think there's not a whole lot to say that racism is permanent is very obvious to us today, especially in 2025. But I want to just show you, it's not much to see, but I want to use 5 slides because it has some music on it. It has one of my favorite songs from the 1970s. So hip hop may be before your time with respect to some of you in the room. For me, it's behind my time because I am an R&B, rock, pump, funk and rock person. I'm of that generation. But I think all of this intergenerational discussion that we're having this morning will show, will prove, will establish how racism morphs, it changes. There's, as Gregory said, there's progress, there's retrenchment, but the substance of things are still the same. So the song that you're going to hear on the next few slides is called Brothers Gonna Work It Out. And it's from the soundtrack of a horrible blaxploitation movie from the 1970s called The Mac. So Gregory mentioned pimps and pushers. That's exactly what the Mac was about. That was what the film was about. That's what the music was about. And you see that from the 70s to the 90s, very little has changed. But we were certainly telling stories in the 70s. And I'm showing the two songs. I'm going to talk about Brothers Gonna Work It Out from the 1970s, and then talk about some of the lyrics from Brothers Going to Work It Out in 1990 from Public Enemy, because I think the two songs encapsulate the nature of racism and its permanence. What I find striking about the two songs by the same name, Brothers Gonna Work It Out, is that Public Enemy did not do a cover of Willie Hutch's 1973 Brothers Gonna Work It Out. He didn't sample Brothers Gonna Work It Out. It's a completely different song. And the only thing Public Enemy's Brothers Gonna Work It Out, the only thing it shares with Willie Hutch's 1973 Brothers Gonna Work It Out is the title and one line. And I think that says it all with respect to racism and what we're experiencing now. The titles may change, a line may change, racism morphs into something different, but the substance is the same. So here we go.
You really don't understand, do you? Hey, man, don't you realize in order for us to make this thing work, man, we've got to get rid of the pimps and the pushers and the prostitutes and then start all over again clean.
Look, nobody's pushing me anyway, okay? I mean, not you, not the cops, nobody, man. I mean, you want to get rid of the pushers, I'll help you. But don't send your people after me.
John, can't you see that we can't get rid of one without getting rid of the other? We got to come down on both of them at the same time in order for this whole thing to work.
Look, nobody's closing me out of my business.
No peace sound if you don't feel it from your heart. United, we can get over, yet we're still apart. Cause each man deserves respect, and they get an equal share. And until you give it in back, there'll be no peace. The brothers gonna work it out. Brothers gonna work it out. Oh, we must all join hands. We can march across this land. Please. With that understanding of instead of brother turning on sister, sister turning on brother. How you gonna get it together? Being against one another. Shoot up, live up so high. When the world turns strong, you deal with the truth. When reality's all gone, but brother gonna work it out. Brother's gonna work it out. Our brothers say, stop the pimps, the hustle, the pusher, man. That's you can. Open your ears and eyes to the facts. What's going on in the back?
Sorry for that lack of order in the slide. Something happened. But I share the song, as I said, because it really shows the connection we have from one generation to another. We were telling stories in the 70s also. We were telling, unfortunately, the same kinds of stories. Let me come back to the 21st century. In 2020, in the aftermath of George Floyd's murder, I happened to be walking down Fifth Avenue in Manhattan, and I saw a group of Black Lives Matter protesters. And at the front of the group was a young Black man who held a sign, "You have effed with the last generation. And of course, his sign didn't say F, he spelled the word out. And I remember looking at it and thinking, looking at the protesters and thinking, you're not going to be the last generation of people in the United States who will be effed with. Because I had read Derek Bell's book. I've been thinking about his thesis that he announced in Faces at the Bottom of the Well. The idea that racism is permanent and indestructible and integral. It helps us to analyze the unanalytical hopefulness of not just that generation of Black people I saw in 2020, but an unanalytical hopefulness of generations of Black people who have bought into this notion told to us by some white Americans about colorblindness being the goal, about not seeing race, about post-racialism. I think if we face the unrealistic desire that was expressed in this young protester's sign, if we understand that racism is permanent, we can invest in more meaningful efforts that address anti-Black racism. So Bell's thesis, The Permanence of Racism, I think prepares us to employ realistic strategies, effective strategies that address, that anticipate the continuing morphing and cycles of anti-Black racism. In another of Public Enemy's songs called Beyond Trayvon, we hear the same kind of bravado of the Black Lives Matter demonstrator with that provocative sign. Quote, touch another Black kid, you have to touch us all. And then at another point in the song, this is everyday life where I'm from. It goes on, but I swear it cannot go beyond Trayvon. Like the Black Lives Matter demonstrator, Public Enemy was concerned with future generations. Quote, for this word to the young, you the future, save our daughters and sons. That's from Beyond Trayvon also. But Public Enemy was clearer than Bell about the nature of anti-Black racism, because their lyrics reference one of the forms of racism that we just don't talk about often enough, and that is white supremacy. We all know our nation was formed, it was built on the myth of white supremacy. Since the inception of the country, the myth of white supremacy has been the foundation of our institutions, governments, organizations, communities. And now in 2025, we are getting a master class in white supremacy. That white supremacy myth normalizes all white spaces at the top of government, at the top of business hierarchies, in certain communities, as a natural consequence of meritocracy. Again, in the song Beyond Trayvon, here's what Public Enemy says, quote, get fear looks, but I live round here. My house right next to yours, but I still get stares. Do I look suspicious? The white supremacy lie, even when it unconsciously is internalized, it leaves little room for questioning the intractability of racial disparities in achievement, in income, in wealth, and in health. The white supremacy myth leaves little room for historical inquiry or inquiry about present day social realities or political realities that explain why there's a racial income gap, a racial wealth gap, a racial health gap, and why those gaps get wider and wider. But of course, the white supremacy myth does not stand alone. It is inextricably and inevitably linked to the myth of Black inferiority. That myth of Black inferiority is the natural consequence of the power of the lie of white supremacy. And the very foundation of the nation was built on the entrenchment of this myth of Black inferiority to make sense out of the liberty and justice for all narrative that prevailed while the nation was enslaving Black folks. So enslaving Black people in a so-called democracy was justified by deeming Black people inferior. The messages and behavior that sustained the Black inferiority myth became relatively tacit in the 20th century, but Public Enemy saw it, even when it wasn't explicit, even when the articulation of white supremacy wasn't so explicit. They said in one of their songs, quote, "They had me in jail for a crime I didn't even commit. A stereotype. They feel every color is inferior, right?" So here you see white supremacy, Black inferiority as part of the social construction of Blackness. And look what's happening in 2025. Consider the attacks on Black and brown workers, professionals who are routinely and pejoratively labeled DEI hires. Even in the face of some blatantly inferior mental acuity of some of the white men who are leading our country, like Hegseth, and I can name others, but I can't go on. It's the time. This is happening. So in 2025, the late 20th century and the early 21st century, there was subtlety at first, but now that rhetorical subtlety has been obliterated, and the inferiority rhetoric is accompanied by aggressive efforts to erase the parts of Black history that record centuries of Black achievement in the face of aggressive exploitation and subjugation. And also erase our historical and present day racist practices that diminish or eviscerate Black success and the accumulation of wealth. In their version of Brothers Gonna Work It Out, Public Enemy says, history shouldn't be a mystery. Our stories, real history, not his story. The public inferiority lie allows some Americans to conclude that racial disparities in wealth and success persist because there's just something wrong with Black and brown people. Even with affirmative action and DEI, they can't seem to close this wealth gap, this health gap. Think about some of the things Charlie Kirk said about Black people. I have many examples, but I'm going to read one example. Here's what he said, Charlie Kirk. If we, quote, "If we would have said that Joy Reid and Michelle Obama and Sheila Jackson Lee and Ketanji Brown Jackson," he didn't say Justice Jackson, by the way, but going back, quote, "if we were to say that they were affirmative action picks, we would have been called racist. And now he seems to be talking to these women, these Black women. Charlie Kirk says, quote, "You do not have the brain processing power to otherwise be taken really seriously. You had to go steal a white person's slot to be taken somewhat seriously." And so I'm going to end with two questions, rhetorical questions. Do these comments give permission to some employers to question the qualifications of Black applicants and employees, even when there's no basis for doing so? Did Charlie Kirk's statements and everything we're hearing right now in 2025 about Black women in particular and about Black folks in general, about stealing a white person's slot, about there being something called Black jobs, does that create an expectation that some slots are only for white people and will continue to limit us? And I'll stop there.
Professor Toussaint?
Afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much, Cheryl, for those insights, and I appreciate my colleagues Gregory and Jade for just allowing me to be a part of this conversation. And I just extend my apologies that I'm not able to be there in person, but I'm excited to be a part of this virtually. As Gregory mentioned earlier, I'll be discussing Public Enemy through the context of the social media landscape, digital resistance, and Afrofuturist futures. Sort of thinking about the way that Public Enemy's work helps us to prefigure different visions of what the future holds for us. So as we all know, and as has already been discussed, Public Enemy emerged in the late 1980s, not merely as musicians, but as cultural revolutionaries. Their work provides a critical framework for understanding how today's digital activists challenge power, construct counter narratives, and imagine liberated futures. By analyzing Public Enemy's music through the lens of critical race theory, I argue that we can see how songs like Fight the Power, 9/11 is a Joke, and Burn Hollywood Burn, all from the 1990 album Fear of a Black Planet, in addition to the song Revolutionary Generation, establish strategies of resistance that continue to resonate across social media platforms today. Critical race theory, as we're discussing today, teaches us that racism is not an aberration, but embedded within legal systems and societal structures. Public Enemy's music makes this theory audible. Their sonic assault, so to speak, on complacency forces listeners to hear how these structures operate in ways that can silence Black voices. For example, in the song Fight the Power, Chuck D declares, quote, and as an aside, I'm not going to do the song's justice, but I'm just going to quote the lyrics so you all can hear the words. But Chuck D says, quote, most of my heroes don't appear on no stamps. Sample a look back, you look and find. Elvis was a hero to most, but he never meant shit to me. Straight up racist, that sucker was, simple and plain, end quote. These lines directly challenge dominant cultural narratives, critiquing how mainstream culture elevates figures who perpetuate racial hierarchies while erasing Black contributions. The lyrics exemplify what CRT scholars call counter storytelling, the practice of centering marginalized voices to expose systemic oppression. It's not simply cultural commentary, it is actually theory in action, enacted through the art. This approach appears in today's viral movements that question public monuments, educational curricula, and whose stories society chooses to tell. Our digital activists, much like Public Enemy, refuse the dominant narrative and instead they construct their own. Public Enemy's song 9/11 is a Joke critiques institutional neglect with devastating clarity. And here's a passage from that song, quote, now, I dialed 9/11 a long time ago. Don't you see how late they're reacting? My man got shot, but the lady at the desk said they don't come out for nothing less than a mess, end quote. So this verse exposes how emergency services systematically failed Black communities, both then and today. In critical race theory terms, it demonstrates structural determinism, racial inequities that are produced not by individual prejudice alone, but by institutions that allocate resources, protection, and violence along racial lines. This critique within the lyrics of the song resonates with contemporary digital activism that seeks to document police brutality, medical neglect, and other forms of systemic harm that have an intentional cadence to them. Another song, Burn Hollywood Burn, Public Enemy addresses the entertainment industry's distortion and erasure of Black representation. The song says, quote, burn Hollywood burn, I smell a riot going on. First they're guilty, now they're gone. Yeah, I'll check out a movie, but it'll take a Black one to move me. Get me the hell away from this TV. All this news and views are beneath me, so all I hear about is shots ringing out, end quote. Here, the group illustrates interest convergence, the idea that institutions only address racial injustice when doing so aligns with their own interests. Hollywood did not change the representation of Black people out of moral awakening, one might argue, but only when economic or political pressures demanded it. Today, digital campaigns continue to highlight the underrepresentation or misrepresentation in media that echoes this very same lesson. And they use social media to make these inequities visible and hold institutions accountable. Yet Public Enemy's work was never solely diagnostic or seeking to point out systems of oppression. It was also deeply imaginative, and this points us to its Afrofuturist dimensions. Albums such as It Takes a Nation of Millions to Hold Us Back in 1988, and again, Fear of Black Planet in 1999, I argue function as Afrofuturist text because they envision Black futures liberated from systemic oppression. In It Takes a Nation of Millions, with its chaotic layers of sirens, samples, and dense production, it creates an apocalyptic soundscape that mirrors social collapse while simultaneously imagining collective Black power as unstoppable. Fear of Black Planet in 1990 extends this vision. The album title itself signals both ending and transformation, the apocalypse as revelation as destruction of the old order and the emergence of a new one. Within this framework, the song Revolutionary Generation becomes almost a manifesto. And it says, quote, "Strong we be strong, the next generation. It's what not who we are facing. The fingers pointed to us in our direction. The blind state of mind needs correction. Word to the mother, we tighten connection." End quote. The song calls on young Black people to take up the revolutionary project, to imagine and construct the futures that previous generations could only dream of. Afrofuturism's core conviction, the idea that Black people can transcend present realities through collective action and visionary imagination, is embedded within the lyrics of this work. Social media platforms today, such as Twitter/X, Instagram, Threads, and TikTok, have become the new stages for this revolutionary vision. Movements like Black Lives Matter channel collective anger and state violence into organized resistance. They operate through interest convergence strategies, making institutional inaction costlier than response via the threat of public censure. Digital activists create hashtags, memes, and viral videos that function much like Public Enemy's layered productions. They seek to interrupt, to confront, to cancel, and to refuse to let audience remain comfortable. When viral videos document police violence, activists are making systemic patterns visible, echoing the same kinds of structural critiques we saw in songs like 9/11 is a joke. Hashtags like Say Her Name highlight the institutional neglect of Black women, reflecting the same insistence on visibility and accountability that Public Enemy demanded decades ago. Similarly, campaigns like Oscars So White directly embody the critique of Burn Hollywood Burn, forcing the entertainment industry to confront their complicity in erasure. These platforms also allow the Afrofuturist imagination that Public Enemy cultivated to thrive. Online communities collaborate and envision liberated futures, living out the vision of the song Revolutionary Generation, using digital tools to build the new world that Public Enemy imagined decades ago. Public Enemy's revolutionary ethos then provides us with two frameworks. Their work exemplifies CRT's principles, exposing structural racism, practicing counter-storytelling, and revealing the self-interest of institutions while emphasizing collective power as a vehicle for change. But they also incorporate an Afrofuturist dimension, showing us that critique alone is insufficient. They insist on imagination and constructing liberated futures. Albums like It Takes a Nation of Millions to Hold Us Back and Fear of a Black Planet were not simply musical statements about the status quo, they were also blueprints, instructing listeners on both analysis and action. So in conclusion, understanding digital activism through the lens of Public Enemy's music and the principles of critical race theory allows us to see the continuity between past and present struggles. Critical race theory gives us the analytical tools to decode structures of oppression, while Afrofuturism provides the imaginative scaffolding for envisioning liberation. And Public Enemy's work embodies both of these domains. It exposes the failures of systems and projects a future beyond them. As digital activists continue to challenge entrenched power, they are extending the revolutionary project that Public Enemy called forth. The resistance continues, the revolution proceeds, and the generation summoned by the revolutionary generation is actively building the futures that Public Enemy once imagined. Thank you.
Well, thank you all so much for coming and for your interest in this book or this project. I'm really honored to be a part of this conversation as someone who grew up in the South, not the North. Grew up in a rural area, not a big city, and someone who didn't really grow up with the music of Public Enemy as the soundtrack of my life, but who understands their significance to African American history and culture. and the significance of music and hip hop to Black liberation. The songs "Shut 'Em Down" and "Can't Trust It" were released in 1991 through Def Jam Recording. They're both singles released from Public Enemy's fourth studio album, Apocalypse 91, The Enemy Strikes Black. The music of Public Enemy speaks powerfully to the problems facing Black Americans and all Americans in a country built on white supremacy, but it also illustrates the reason that hip hop music is often vilified, feared, and targeted for commodification to water down its message. As we think through the problems that music illustrates, it can also point the way towards solutions. I'd like to talk briefly about the ways in which critical race theory scholarship can help us understand the structural nature of the problems that Public Enemy identifies. I'd also like to imagine possible interventions that the law might provide to target these problems based on my scholarly interest in community development law and the racial wealth gap. So these two songs focus on African American history and the way in which the past is the present. Can't Trust It locates the origins of the struggles of the African diaspora in America in the Middle Passage of the transatlantic slave trade. Slavery is more than a metaphor. It is a condition that shapeshifts and adapts, similar to the way in which Elise Body explains discrimination and its persistence in her North Carolina Law Review article called Adaptive Discrimination. And Can't Trust It, Public Enemy says, so here's a song to the strong about the shake of the snake and the smile went along. With that, can't trust it. They connect the person who intervened when, quote unquote, as they say in the song, the king and the chief probably had a big beef, referring to the African leaders that sold people they took captive from enemy nations, tribes, or ethnic groups into slavery. And that interventionist, as you might call him, is the European slave trader who forcibly took Africans to the Americas by the Middle Passage. Because of that, now I grit my teeth. We grit our teeth in slave ships on the Middle Passage, which they compellingly describe the pain of being at the bottom of that ship and the bottom of the hull. We grit our teeth to cope with white supremacy and dehumanization today, and anger and frustration, fueling a rage to produce change, part of their ethic as prophets of rage. The European slave trader and the modern white businessman or politician who denies Black people jobs and opportunity are and were the snake with the smile. In fair housing law, part of the story that emerges about the difficulty of combating housing discrimination is that it comes with a handshake and a smile. Racism dissembles in ways that conceal its violence and renders poverty, severe inequality, and dispossession normal. Shut 'Em Down grows out of the story of migration from rural to urban life that defined much of the African American experience after the Civil War. We celebrate the Great Migration, and my family's a product of the Great Migration. My family's from Mississippi on both sides. My father's family moved to Cleveland in the 1930s, and my mother's family moved to Chicago in 1950. And they came back to Mississippi a year before I was born. So we celebrate the migration, but what emerged from it in many northern and western cities like Los Angeles was persistent state-sponsored racial discrimination in housing that confined Black Americans to certain neighborhoods, targeted them for disinvestment, or otherwise facilitated conditions that kept Black people from accessing the resources to develop communities, or to develop sort of strong, viable, economically thriving communities. In 1991, Chuck D reportedly gave an interview to a reporter at Melody Maker, a defunct British weekly music magazine, explaining some of the songs on the Apocalypse 91 album. And he said, Shut 'Em Down is about major corporations like Nike taking profits from the Black community, but not giving anything back, never opening businesses in Black areas. And it's saying that the best way to boycott a business is to start your own. Both of these songs engage with racial capitalism and the commitment to extraction from communities of color that has long characterized economic life and relations in the United States. Cedric Robinson is one of many political theorists and scholars who has argued that racial capitalism explains how the development, organization, and expansion of capitalist society pursued essentially racial directions. Racialism is embedded in the structures that emerge from capitalism. Together, the two songs draw a direct line between slavery and modern capitalism. Robin D.G. Kelly explained or builds on Cedric Robinson's formulation of racial capitalism in this way. Capitalism emerged within the feudal order and flowered in the cultural soil of a Western civilization already thoroughly infused with racialism. Capitalism and racism, in other words, did not break from the old order, but rather evolved from it to produce a modern world system of racial capitalism dependent on slavery, violence, imperialism, and genocide. And the song Public Enemy sings, who count the money in the neighborhood? But we spending money to no end, looking for a friend. In a war to the core, ripping up the poor in the stores until they get a brother kicking down doors. They don't really want it to be another racial attack in disguise, so give some money back. I like Nike, but wait a minute. The neighborhood supports, so put some money in it. All corporations owe, they got to give up the dough to my town or else we got to shut them down. And that's the origin of the song. Shut them down, shut them down, shut them down. Exactly, right. Okay, so Chuck D says the best way to boycott a business is to start your own. He draws on a vision of Black economic self-sufficiency. History illustrates that this dream has existed in some communities of Black economic self-sufficiency, like Black Wall Street in Tulsa, destroyed by the race massacre. For example, certainly since the end of slavery through Jim Crow segregation. But the strategy of integration in the modern civil rights movement of the 1950s and 60s made African Americans more interconnected with the broader U.S. economy in ways that made economic independence more difficult. The history and legacy of Black-owned banks, covered by Mersa Baradaran in her book, The Color of Money, also illustrates this interdependence and the difficulty that Black-owned banks have faced in acquiring capital to grow and expand their operations to change the economic outlook and opportunities for a majority of Black Americans. In some ways, one might argue that the message of shut them down emphasizes individualistic competition and private ownership, elements of capitalism that have led to Black exploitation. Indeed, Chuck D's explanation for both songs references obtaining power through business. The risk of such an approach can replicate the abuses of traditional American capitalism, copying the master's method and using the master's tools, as Audre Lorde has taught us, will not necessarily get you the power we see in the master's results. The social consciousness out of which Public Enemy arose, however, suggests that they're talking about a collective competition, Black Americans and their allies versus their opponents. They're talking about collective ownership, where Black communities own resources and share in the wealth they generate. Their music is not weighed down by individual materialistic ambition that characterizes the public personas of many modern commercialized hip hop artists today. And I won't name any names. I'm sure you all have people come to mind. The vision does not seem to be that a Black man owns a shoe company like Nike and he alone gets rich off of the coins of the African American community. Instead, a vision of an entire community owning such a company and elevating itself from the revenue that company generates is an interpretation more consistent with Public Enemy's ethos. It is not the cynical Black capitalism that the Nixon administration pushed in the 1970s to promote its neoliberal policies, which only served to widen the racial wealth gap in America. It is a vision that breaks from the individualistic demands of capitalism. In effect, it resonates as part of a set of principles that Etienne actually described in his article, Black Urban Ecologies and Structural Extermination: social solidarity, economic democracy, and solidarity economy. These principles are important as well because law is an apparatus in the project of building power. Law provided for, reinforced, and protected the slave trade. Capitalism requires a legal system that protects business interests in order for the system to operate and to thrive, down to systems that enforce obligations under contracts and protect the possession of property. And I think this is why the emergence of the race and private law movement is so important to understand the application of critical race theory in areas like contracts and property law. Law can be used in particular ways to solve problems, but there must be an ethic and a politics behind the use of that tool that constrains its results. And I would submit that the ethos of Public Enemy's music is a sort of a light toward the kind of ethics and politics that should drive our use of legal tools to solve problems in economic development. I'm particularly interested in the relationship between race and municipal debt. Last year, I published an article entitled Rate Covenants and Municipal Bonds, Selling Away Fair Housing and Civil Rights Goals. It won the 2024 Emerging Scholar Award from the Denver Law Review. I didn't mention that in my bio, but thought of it anyway. And this is a cash prize award you all should consider applying. It's better than Scholastica, I'll tell you that. I wanted to write about race and money, and municipal finance is an area that brings in billions of dollars of investment into cities, but the benefits are not evenly distributed. I built on the work of Destin Jenkins, a historian at Yale, and his book, The Bonds of Inequality, about the development of San Francisco in the mid-20th century with municipal debt built on the credit of taxpayers, including Black tax-paying residents, that ignored Black and Latino communities and instead facilitated what he calls the infrastructural investment in whiteness, building art museums and downtown parking garages rather than new elementary schools, or preserving high-quality public housing in Black communities through the use of municipal bonds. We must control the terms of municipal debt so that it does not render communities unaffordable, and so cities led by people of color and with BIPOC majorities have fair and equitable access to financing to improve low-income communities. I'm also inspired by the use of legal tools to allow community members to become co-owners of commercial real estate development, which is, I think, thoroughly consistent with the theme of shut them down, figuring out a way to start businesses in Black communities that are owned by Black people in that community, or owned by people in that community invested in its success and uplift. And I look at efforts that some activists have powerfully referred to as buying back the block. And the ABA Forum on Affordable Housing and Community Development did a webinar called Buying Back the Block earlier this year that I would point you to, and certainly getting you more involved in the ABA Forum on Affordable Housing for all of the lawyers in the room. In 2012, the Jumpstart Our Business Startups or Jobs Act passed with bipartisan support. It eased some longstanding federal Securities and Exchange Commission or SEC restrictions, allowing companies to raise seed money through crowdfunding, which had become a popular form of collecting donations on platforms like Kickstarter and GoFundMe. So the problem has historically been that raising money with individual residents to own a commercial real estate asset has been considered offering a security regulated under the federal and state securities laws, or blue sky laws, as they're known for state securities laws. Its details are complicated. The details of this Jobs Act are complicated and often require experienced lawyers to use them, which is why we need more finance-minded lawyers in this space. But it can be used as a form of investment that pays financial returns. So I'll give you a great example. In Oakland, the East Bay Permanent Real Estate Cooperative, also known as EB-PREC, launched in 2018, led by people of color. It pools monies from hundreds of investors of many income levels who can put in $1,000 or more to help EB-PREC acquire local real estate for housing and commercial uses. The investors earn a modest return of 1.5%, which is more than triple what you get from the bank when you put your money in a regular savings account, for example. And they become part owners of the cooperative. EB-PREC, in turn, restores or transforms the purchased buildings into permanently affordable homes, not subject to tax credits where they expire in 15 years and become market rate properties. And they also acquire businesses which are collectively owned and stewarded by residents, investors, community members, and staff, rather than outside corporate profiteers. As of last month, EB-PREC reports that it has raised $5.4 million in investor-owned shares, along with nearly $25 million in grants and low-interest loans, and they paid out over $52,000 in dividends to investors. And this is all happening in 7 years. And guess how much the Nike store in the Black neighborhood, or the Hibbett Sports Store in the Black neighborhood is paid out to. Their residents who put all this money into this store, the kind that Public Enemy cites, goose eggs, right? But these people are paid out over $52,000 in dividends to investors over 7 years. So I'd like to end on this note. I was talking to another scholar at the dinner last night about this project, and we started talking about our interest in returning to the music of artists whose careers are associated with the fight for liberation, like Bob Marley and Fela Kuti in Nigeria. I was reminded of Fela Kuti's song, Shuffling and Smiling, and one of the best book titles I've ever encountered from a book I discovered in college. Music is the weapon of the future. Music is the weapon of the future. A book by Frank Tenile on the future of African popular music. In these dark times, we must use art to communicate and draw strength. Music links the African diaspora, Public Enemy in the United States, Bob Marley in the Caribbean, Fela Kuti in West Africa, and all of them are in conversation. They have something to teach us as a people. Music is the thread that is the weapon of the future. Thank you.
So we have about 25 minutes. I first want to start with taking any questions, comments, criticisms, concerns from members of the audience. Yeah. Here and then here.
A question that's not necessarily law focused, but kind of like EV Prec that you spoke of, Jade. There are communities that are opening like grocery collectives and other stores. But in this climate that we have recently entered, do you think that that is something that we will see on the rise more often? And also, like, I don't really hear much past, oh, this happened, it's open. Does it actually help the community long term? Have we been able to track such advancements over time, or is it just too new of an idea? And then also, like, I personally would love to only buy black. I feel like that is an idea that should come, but also Amazon is so easy, and I know it's the devil, but like, it's how do we kind of find a way to build? Is that something we build in our community? Do we just have to hold on to the rough starts? Because I mean, I wasn't on Amazon in the early days, so I don't know if it was just as hard then as it is for Nile that recently came out, and I can't. No offense to Nile, but I really can't stand it. Like, it's not as easy. Do we have to just hold on? And do these things over time end up bringing us better, in your opinion?
Should we take multiple questions, like maybe 3 at a time, and then come back, or just go one at a time?
We'll do one at a time.
Okay. So remind me of the first question again.
I have ADHD, I don't remember. But I think it was something along the lines of like,
do we see these strategies?
Are there more things coming, especially in the climate that we're in politically, where we're seeing DEI being taken down, or are these DEI when we're making our own collectives in community zones?
Yeah, I think in this period of sort of declining federal investment, to put it mildly, and sort of a walk away from a commitment to racial equality, even among certain states and various state programs, solidarity economies will be even more important to generate. And part of the power, of this strategy is that it does rely on private ordering, the use of contracts and corporate law to generate and create our own institutions. Dylan Penningroth has written a great book about the sort of hidden history of the civil rights movement called Before the Movement, which discusses how African Americans use the law of contract, corporate law, and property law to protect their own interests and advance their interest in racial uplift before the modern civil rights movement and the growth of anti-discrimination law. And so I think this is part of a similar project. The corporate legal systems are somewhat insulated in the sense that the law applies to everyone, and changing sort of key corporate or contract law doctrines can have negative effects for white people that they can't necessarily insulate themselves from by changing the way in which they apply the law to black people as part of his argument. And I think to some extent that has a lot of truth to it. But essentially, to your point, I think we will need to start looking at ways to pool our own resources, share our own wealth, and start to control ownership of institutions and prices for ourselves. I don't, to the point about tracking, I haven't read anything that really tracks these studies over a long period of time, or that studies these institutions like E.B. Preck over a long period of time. And I guess I would submit that not many of them have existed for a very long period of time. But to the ones that have, there should be some longitudinal studies developed, perhaps at a place like UCLA that has the expertise to look at how successful these institutions have been and how do we kind of scale up these models. And I also, want to respond to the point about how do we find a way to buy black. I feel the same way. It's Amazon is so easy. Walmart is down the road, and these are places that I tend to go to all the time. But I think when we know about black-owned businesses, we should try to patronize them first. If we can, reasonably. Like if you got a black-owned cleaners, I'm going to go there before I go to the white-owned cleaners. If there's a black-owned convenience store, I'll go there before I go to another one. And there are some communities that have created like lists of black-owned businesses in your area where you can start to find at least small business vendors that do services you need on a daily basis that you can go to first in your region.
Etienne and Cheryl, did you want to chime in?
Yeah, I would say, let me just say that there's a book that was written, and I was just looking for the author and the title of the book, but some of you may have read it. It's a book about the author tried to buy black for an entire year, and she had a very difficult time in doing so. Mm-hmm. And I think that's intentional. I don't know if anybody knows the name of the book, but I think it's intentional. You think about Tulsa and the destruction of black businesses. I think we're living in a climate where that is still very, very relevant, that, people have written about the destruction of black businesses and black independence that was caused by integration. When people were living in segregated towns, we all patronized each other, but now there's the element of choice. Yeah, I'll just stop there.
Yes, hi, thank you. So this is the music of my generation. So, and all of these songs, I know these songs top to bottom. I know all the words to all of them. And so I had two things that I was wondering about. The first is kind of somewhat of the lack of intersectionality as a part of this, right? So I don't think Public Enemy was particularly misogynist. I don't think that. But I think that there are particular songs. Like, so for example, She Watched Channel Zero. He says she watched Channel Zero, and like the vapidness in her mind of what it is that she can't see, right? You think about Flavor Flav and his misogyny, right? That was part of PE. And so I'm wondering what you think, or even now thinking about beyond Trayvon. Why focus on Trayvon, but not on black women who have been killed, right? And so I'm just wondering what you think about the lack of intersectionality in PE's work, and what do you think that says for this kind of the future thinking? And then the second question I had was about, hold on, I think I wrote it down. Oh, I'm wondering to the extent to which you see this project being taking all of their body of work together rather than just looking at particular songs, right? So if you take all of the body of work and you analyze all the songs, I'm just wondering what you think that analysis would look like versus saying, okay, let's look at Fight the Power. Let's look at, 911 is a joke. Let's look at these individual songs.
Man, great questions. I'll jump in part because I've always wanted to do a book on PE. They changed my life. This is an important part of the story. So, I grew up in the Hamptons, and if you've ever heard about the Hamptons, you might imagine there ain't a lot of black people there. My maternal grandparents moved there in like the 30s and had 13 children. So most of the black people I grew up around are my cousins. And I remember a white friend of mine asking me if I had ever heard of the group Public Enemy. This was in 8th grade. She was like, I was at another friend's house and he was playing it, and it was the first album. I had never heard of it. Got the first album. And then when It Takes a Nation of Millions came out, I bought 2 copies, one for me and one for this white friend, Bruce Cotter. And then I listened to the lyrics. I mean, I really listened to them and I read them. And this was around the time in which Yusuf Hawkins was killed, black kid killed by a group of white kids in New York. And my father was a social studies teacher, junior high. And I remember reading the lyrics, and I would go to him and I'd ask him, who are Vesey and Prosser? And he would say, go get those books off the shelf. And who is X? And he was like, go get that book off the shelf. Mm-hmm. And it was the first time I really read as a personal interest. And I don't think I'd be a law professor or psychologist or interested in CRT. I wouldn't have gone to HBCU, really, if it wasn't for Public Enemy. And so I think it's important to grapple with the breadth and depth of their catalog. But the truth is, most of this book probably focuses on their first 5 albums. And maybe there's a way we can think of sort of integrating more of it. And each chapter is sort of thematic, right? And it necessitates grappling with specific songs or specific verses in some of the songs to the exclusion of others. PE and women. I mean, you got to keep in mind their biggest influences. The 2 things about Public Enemy. Their influences were the Black Panthers. There was a certain level of misogyny there.
Oh, yeah.
And the Nation of Islam, which is very conservative in how they think about roles of men and women. Many of the members of Public Enemy, especially the security, are active members of the Nation of Islam. The second thing I'd say is PE is a mixture of different kinds of people. So Chuck D once said, look, he's a B-boy, right? Like, he's into hip hop. He's a college educated guy into hip hop and sports who became more socially conscious through his relationship with Professor Griff and the group and the security of the group. Flavor Flav is the comic relief. Flavor had drug addiction issue. Flavor is a musical genius.
He is a musical genius.
But he had drug addiction issues, not nearly as socially conscious as other members of the group. Terminator X, who was their DJ, he's actually very shy. Wasn't necessarily a socially conscious guy, but he hung around these guys and became their DJ. And then you have Professor Griff, who was very steeped in the Nation of Islam and Black Panthers and martial arts. And he's the one who brought the security force together, most of whom were, and they're a mixture too. One of them was an NYPD officer, but they all were sort of very interested in the Nation of Islam. But yes, I think that they tended to have pretty quote unquote conservative views about the roles of men and women. And then to Cheryl's point, the song "Brother's Gonna Work It Out." It's patriarchal, right? That black, and I thought you were going to show the video, Cheryl, where the brothers are showing up to protect the community, sisters as well. But I think your points are well taken.
Yeah, just with respect to Brother's Gonna Work It Out, Gregory only gave us 11 or 12 minutes. So I plan to address that issue when I write the chapter. But it was a huge issue that the world was collapsed in masculinity and references were only to men. And I think they were just part of that reality in the 1990s. That's certainly true for Willie Hutch. And I agree with the person who asked the question. I don't think that relates to misogyny, but it simply relates to self-involvement and seeing the world from a particular lens.
Can I just add one other thing? You referenced a song on It Takes a Nation of Millions. Was that what, Sophisticated Bitch?
No, no.
That was off the first album.
She watched Channel
She
Zero.
watched Channel Zero. But then they also have Show 'em What You Got,
That's true.
which is a speech. They're using a speech by a woman minister in the Nation of Islam, Minister Ava Muhammad, who's a lawyer. She actually went to Georgetown Law School. She was a lawyer for the nation. And she's talking about all these great black leaders, mostly men. I think some women. I think she's analogizing them to Minister Farrakhan. But that was unique, right? Having a woman minister on the album.
And one other thing.
Yeah.
But there's another. So if you think about the beginning of Fight the Power, right? The
Song or video?
Yeah, our best trained, best educated, best equipped still refuse to fight. In fact, they would rather switch
Yeah.
than fight, right? So you even have that homophobia that's going on in that place too. And again, I think that this is right. It's part of where they were, but I think it's something that should be acknowledged, right? That they also had these other things, nowhere near as bad as it is right now, right? When it comes to misogyny and homophobia, but just something to put that out there. Yeah.
Thank you.
Just a quick.
Yes, Etienne.
Yeah, I just wanted to briefly affirm the point and the question. I think it's so important. And just to state that it goes, in my view, it goes even deeper than simply acknowledging the importance of intersectionality and acknowledging the extent to which Public Enemy's analysis of the world was through their masculine gaze. The extent to which critical race theory in its earliest conception is pushing us to consider how race as a social construct also constitutes the boundaries of how we perceive what law is and can be. Feminist legal theory, especially through the gaze of Black women, right, and intersectionality is a part of that, pushes us to consider the way gender places boundaries around how we conceptualize law and what law can be and become. And there's an extent to which even critical race theory, at least the way that it's typically defined, has its shortcomings insofar as it over-indexes the concept of race and the way that that constitutes how we define law and sort of underemphasizes the role of gender. And to be sure, the chapter that I'm writing wouldn't delve too deeply into this, but certainly what Jade is talking about, sort of when you look at the very structure of the political economy and the way that gender has been used historically to demarcate spaces of public and private, when you look at the context of the home and the workplace, there's a lot that can be said when you bring race and gender together to critique what the songs are saying and what the songs are not saying about what law is and can be and can become. So I think your point is just such an important one. And, I think our goal is to try to weave that in as much as possible. But certainly there needs to be conversation between, quite frankly, critical race theory as such and feminist legal theory through the lens of Black women and the tremendous work that has been done there, and sort of how did those two works come together to say something profound about what law is and where law can go, and really challenge at a foundational level concepts like contract and property, and the Black body and how they show up in the world in different ways. And so, these men are a product of their time, but even as we try to analyze what they're saying and how they're speaking politically to what's happening around them, you're absolutely right that their worldview is constrained not just by race, but also how they understand gender. And that absolutely needs to be said. And it's an ongoing project for scholars to continue to think about that, because it has a lot of implications even today for the conversations we're having about law.
One more thing about this. I do think about some speeches Minister Farrakhan gave in the 80s, and a lot of it, when it talked about the role of black men and women, the narrative was black men are under attack in this country in ways in which black women aren't. Because I was, as Etienne was speaking, I was thinking about Sister Souljah and how she became sort of an unofficial member of the group or an affiliate. And I think Terminator X had a solo album. There was a song on there, Buck Wilden. And at the beginning, Sister Souljah has an intro. She says, "We are at war. Black man, where's your heart? The black man is so strong, there's no reason he can't win. Everybody's going to have to get serious." And then later on, she says, what is America's beef with the black man? Is it the way you walk? Is it the way you talk? Every brother and sister has got to be a soldier in the war against the black man. They want to keep your mind in a constant state of aggravation, right? And so it's even when there's a woman who's loosely a part of the group, like her narrative, it underscores their narrative, and that is black men are seen as more of a threat in the society, and therefore a lot more focus and attention needs to be placed on them. Maybe it's wrong assessment, but that's their assessment, and it comes from a particular ideology.
Yes, it's great. Thank you so much for your scholarship. This is such a rich, interesting topic. Just in line with what everyone's saying, I think that we need to embrace the contradictions. This is a dialectical kind of phenomenon we're dealing with, where there is an affirmative, a lot of what we've talked about is the affirmative power of raising our consciousness. And then on the other side, you've got the misogyny, the homophobia. And the other piece, I thought you were going here with this, Jade, you mentioned racial capitalism. I think, yes, hip hop is a weapon, but we can also look at it as a mirror or a reflection into, our culture, what this culture is doing to us as a people, right? And that's where the homophobia comes in. Inevitably, anything that's dope is going to get commoditized. What does that say about the political economy, right? And so, my first favorite album was Jay-Z's The Blueprint. And, the motif there is capitalism is great, get your hustle on, right? Get paid. And I listen to that now and I'm like, oh my God, this is not how the world works. You got lucky, Jay. This is, I just wanted to make that comment.
Thank you. Yes.
I think we got another question over here.
Oh, where was it? Here and then here.
Yeah, to that same degree, we discussed Black inferiority and futurism earlier. So I was wondering, how can we position rap, and specifically Public Enemy and more conscious rappers and socially conscious rappers, and within CRT as a critical methodology that does not, in the same way that the reproduction or the publishing of Black death online and in more traditional spaces reinforce abstraction and Black abjugation, Black subjugation into necropolis and all of that terrible, terrible things that we have to deal with. And so to this end, what is the end goal of pursuing Black banks, Black private property, and Black neoliberal notions of success, when after time and time again we see that when we do achieve some degree of Black neoliberal success, it just continues to be decimated? Tulsa was mentioned earlier. Yeah.
Good question.
Yeah.
You want to start?
Yeah, I thought we might take her question then.
It's like Cheryl.
Cheryl?
Yeah.
Well, we'll answer this and then we're going to come to you. We'll make sure we come to you.
Okay. No, it's okay if you don't.
Huh?
It's also okay if you can't.
Cheryl?
I think I had a little trouble hearing the question, but I think part of it is about the practical application of what we're talking about in analyzing critical race theory. It's a sort of so what question. And I just wanted to speak narrowly to my chapter. I have taught and written about corporate law and race, corporate governance and race for a long time, and have been frustrated by the inadequacy of diversity, equity, and inclusion programs. They're cosmetic, they're window dressing. Some of them were even downright nonsensical. And I think well, Jade mentioned this about using the arts, using music, literature, theater, film, performance art, visual art as part of DEI. Incorporating critical race theory is important. That's how I see the usefulness of this project. Because one of the biggest narratives right now is, there's nothing more we can do for Black and brown people. You've already had affirmative action for a few decades and DEI for a minute, ineffective DEI and ineffective affirmative action. But I think it can be used as a way to provide a counter narrative to what is being stated as the present reality. I think corporations need to understand what people of color are saying, because they certainly respond to the public for reputational value. They certainly did so in 2020. They did it even before 2020 by making these corporate statements about anti-racism after George Floyd was murdered. But then even before 2020, when Roseanne Barr said something derogatory about a Black woman, Valerie Jarrett, and ABC canceled her on the show. So that's how I see the practical application of all of this.
Etienne, thank you, Cheryl.
Very important question. Very difficult question. Difficult in part because there's an extent to which even a conversation about goals is sort of constrained by it's sort of constrained by how we define the term, and I think it to some extent, critical race theory is part of a larger tradition of Black studies that's trying to call into question the meaning. What does it mean to be a human within the context of our current social reality, and more specifically to be a so-called Black human? And I think for us as lawyers, what does it mean to be a citizen within the context of this democratic project, as it were? And there is an extent to which, and this is just my view, that the idea that being a citizen requires a specific end material goal is a byproduct of a sort of capitalist conception of our social order, that we have to accumulate or gain something to be deemed a success, so to speak. And so I think the question of goals is a very complicated one, because there's an extent to which art is just a form of testimony. It's a form of bearing witness. It's a form of speech. And that the goal of speech, the goal of testimony, the goal of bearing witness is simply participating in the dialogical process of democracy. And so the goal could merely be to celebrate and to understand more deeply what it means to be a citizen who bears witness to the ongoing struggles of the democratic project that we're trying to aspire to. But certainly, there are questions about what the practical goals of all of this is. Is it to reform the system, which at some level, is embracing and legitimating the system? Is it to tear down the system and build something new, which sounds like it's more in line with what Public Enemy was calling for? And, if you're pessimistic, you might think there's no point, nothing is going to change. Racism is endemic, racism is permanent. And the goal of all this is to just highlight how bad things are until we amass enough power politically to tear everything down. If you're more optimistic, you might think we can actually reform in some capacity the system we have and make it work. And that, has this has its critics, you know, that we're trying to just create, I think, as you said, sort of a black neoliberal project, and where's that going to end? And I don't have the answer to that. To me, I think at best, this is an opportunity to celebrate just the act of being a citizen and bearing testimony in a society that's corrupt and that possibly might be in the end days. But bearing testimony and speaking truth to power is also part of the goal, right? Like, we have a voice, we have agency, and you're going to hear us. And because we're citizens and we have a right to protest, we have a right to speak, we have a right to hate our country even as we love it, right? As Baldwin said, and speak up about the things that we see around us that we don't like. We don't have the answer, but speaking out loud and saying we don't have the answer, but we don't like what we see is also part of what it means to be a part of the political project. So,
Oh, wait,
Can we just,
well, I thought the question was directed to me.
Okay, all right.
So I also want to say, and then we'll get to you, that there is power in speaking up, testifying, and bearing witness, rather than letting it live inside of you and explode internally. It is important to get it out and let it go. I also think one of the things that inspired me about these two songs is, at a minimum, and the broader project of hip hop music is the articulation of a different version of success, or the way in which it made me think about perhaps a different version of success, which I don't think is consistent with the sort of black neoliberal success. What I'm thinking of is that they're not pointing the way toward individual forms of achievement, but collective achievement where we have a shared investment. And it's not just a small number of people getting rich. Even in Black Wall Street, and there's a small cadre of people who owned hotels and businesses on Greenwood Avenue who lost those. And then there's a larger set of people who don't have that power of ownership. It wasn't like everybody in that whole community owned all of these institutions. And expanding the investment in the assets that we create can expand at least the sort of coalition of people interested in protecting those assets because they're benefiting in a direct sense as well. And I think the neoliberal project is about individual achievement. And what I'm hearing from the music is a pointing away toward collective achievement. Otherwise, it doesn't really seem to make much of a difference. I mean, if you're talking about like black people owning Nike, it reminds me of Robert Johnson, who owned BET and then he sold it. And he got rich, but none of us did. And so it can't be that, right? It has to be, to me, something else for this to matter. And also, I think we have to accept that there is a requirement for vigilance. Freedom is not free. As Angela Davis reminds us, freedom is a constant struggle. And part of, Derek Bell's thesis around the permanence of racism is to educate people to get ready to dig your heels in, because this isn't going to go away. This is something you have to commit to for life. As Nelson Mandela said, the struggle is my life. And if you're not willing to sit in it for life, you got to engage with that.
One other thing I'd add to this group is, if you ever watch Public Enemy videos or them on stage, S1Ws, the security of first world, two things about them. One, they carried Uzis, fake Uzis, on stage. And two, they would do martial arts on stage, symbolic of, we're here to fight for ours, right?
Yeah.
Like, so if you're creating institutions and the like, it isn't just about a song. It isn't just about what you teach in class. CRT is about activism, right?
Yeah.
And fighting for your interests.
No, that's fine. That's fine.
You sure?
Yeah.